For great ideas and practical tools you can start using tomorrow to grow your business and separate you from the competition, you've come to the right place. If you're into B2B marketing and sales, then welcome to the one and only B2B Marketing and Sales Podcast. With over 60 and counting total years in the trenches of businesses small and large, they have a plethora of knowledge and experience that generate you more leads, capture more clients, ring up more sales. Well, doggone it, just make you more money. How about that? Always thought-provoking, yet dubiously entertaining. Please welcome to their respective microphones across 3 time zones, your co-ringmasters, the Dave Loomis, and not the rock star, Steve Miller.
Hello, everyone. This is Dave Loomis and the B2B Marketing and Sales Podcast. Welcome. Our guest today is someone that I have known for quite some time and a pretty interesting and amazing person. I think you will agree. We are joined by Scott Allen, and Scott is a PhD doctor. So Dr. Allen, this is going to be a mouthful, but it's the Robert M. Ginn Institute Professor for Leadership and Social Responsibility at John Carroll University. John Carroll is in the suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, if you don't know. And he wears a lot of hats, Scott. So he's an associate professor. He teaches courses in leadership, the future of work, executive communication. He's won a lot of awards as a professor. He also organizes some incredible speaking engagements that a lot of people, leaders around town here attend, and really all over the world. He has a research stream that really focuses on leadership development. That's what we're going to talk about. There's lots of book chapters, dozens of those, which I won't go into. He also created a book and blog called Captivation, because he's also an expert in presentation design and speaking, public speaking, and coaches a lot of leaders all over the world in that. And if that wasn't enough, he's the host of Phronesis, which is called Practical Wisdom for Leaders, which is one of the top 3% of podcasts in the world, basically, right, Scott? Amazing.
Yeah, that's what they say.
Yeah. So, and in his spare time, he consults for lots of companies. It's a who's who of Fortune 500 and also nonprofits, and he's involved in leadership societies and in Cleveland and in all over the country and world, and lives quite near me in a little old mill town with a waterfall going through it called Chagrin Falls, Ohio. He has 3 children. And Scott, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to see you, Dave. I appreciate the opportunity to engage with you today. We'll have fun.
Yeah, we definitely will. A lot to talk about, and I'm sure that the bar's pretty low here for the B2B Marketing and Sales Podcast.
That's not true.
No. I'm just kidding. I'm sure that you'll be great, since you have a great podcast of yourself of your own. And for those of you who don't know too much about John Carroll, the Bowler School of Business is really an amazing place. And I think it ranked like number 1 for job readiness in some certain rankings, which I think is, honestly, let's just say that's the most important thing there is.
Yes. And it was the last year that Bloomberg had done that ranking. And so we were ranked number 1. So we are forever number 1.
Perfect. I love it. Well, that's great. So let's get into it a little bit, Scott. This is the B2B Marketing and Sales Podcast. We talk a lot about that topic, not exclusively, but some of the guests we have on really sort of take their center of work and then and share that with us, and then we can either make the connections ourselves to B2B marketing and sales. What's that mean? Or we can allow listeners to make the obvious connections themselves.
Great.
So one of the things I do is teach, and I conduct a lot of voice of customer research, especially in the B2B space. And I love asking extremely open-ended questions because there's not enough of that,
Yes.
There's not enough of that in the world.
Today, Dave, I just finished today a great book called A More Beautiful Question. Have you come across that book?
I haven't, but I want to read it now.
Yes.
I'm writing it down. The More Beautiful Question.
Yes.
And what is that all about? I can guess.
Well, it's about the art of questions and questioning. And there's a really, really cool quote that he starts off with by E.E. Cummings, and it says, "Always the more beautiful answer who asks the more beautiful question." And so that kind of is the starting point for the book. And yes, it's about, are we asking the right questions so that when we begin the brainstorming process, which is another book I just finished, which was fascinating, called Idea Flow, from folks at the Stanford D School. And, that was a really interesting read too, because that then is about, once we have the right questions, how might we, and then, frame up the question. And are you coming up with, hundreds of ideas? And most human beings, the first kind of potential option, the processing stops and we go. It was funny though. The other day I was in an organization, Dave, and I said to the human beings in the room, I said, go ahead and try and get 25 ideas as quickly as you can. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes. And then I asked ChatGPT the same question, and it had its 25 ideas in about 15 seconds.
Of course it did.
And most humans didn't get to 25 in 10 minutes. So it was interesting.
That's interesting. So part of it is that we maybe have to turn off our filter, because we have a filter of practicality. Yes. Some people's filters are stronger than others. I've studied something called the Curtin Adaptation Innovation, KAI. Okay. It's a thinking style study of a guy that out in the UK.
Okay.
And it's fascinating. You take this they call it an instrument. You're not supposed to call it a survey, but you answer some questions. Yeah. And it tells you, sort of on a bell curve where your thinking style is. Oh. In other words, are you sort of more rigid and a rule follower, like or using the word creative is not appropriate in this point, but it's basically saying, so if someone said, hey, this process is broken, fix it. The person with a low sort of KAI or more rigid would just say, oh, let's take what we've got and let's tweak it and we'll, iterate and we'll, the person with the high KAI will blow the whole thing up and start from scratch, and there's no rules, and these people. Oh yeah. And, they're often referred to as creatives, but they are, sort of better at turning that filter off. Well, speaking of the beautiful question, and long way to get to my question, which maybe it'll be the only question that I ask, which is very open-ended. And I'm just curious, when people are in business or in a focus area for so long, they sort of get to a place where they're beyond sort of the typical list of things to talk about. And there's new things that are coming on the horizon. And I'm just wondering, what are you thinking about right now when it comes to leadership in this category? And, just 4 to 5 things that might come to mind that are maybe new or different, or maybe they're just the same. Maybe they're foundational principles that have always been around and should be around. But I'll let you tackle that one. Well,
I came across a quote on my podcast probably, this might be about a year and a half ago. A gentleman named Doug Lindsay, who's at the Air Force Academy, turned me on to this quote. He said, this is a quote by a gentleman named Bob Hogan, and Hogan assessments are very famous in the assessment universe when it comes to management development and leader development. But Hogan said, who you are is how you lead. And that quote has just I mean, it's just had me cooking for this year and a half and I almost start all of my sessions off this way when I'm doing
Who you are is how you lead.
Yeah, when I'm doing work with organizations, I almost always start off with that because it's just a beautiful quote. Talk about a beautiful question. This is a beautiful quote. I mean, in so many ways, it sums it up in a really, really nice way. I mean, I often will say, okay, so what does that quote mean to you? And people come back with all kinds of very interesting slices of what that means. So some people might say, well, it's your personality. It's you're extroverted or you're introverted or you're conscientious or you're agreeable or you're optimistic or you're a person with great levels of grit and resilience. It's your personality. And other people might say, well, it's your character and who you are as your character. And are you authentic and do you have integrity? So sometimes people kind of go down that road. Other times people go down the road of, well, it's your lived experience. It's where you come from. It's what you grow up in, where you grew up. It's all of
heuristics.
That. Yeah, it's all of that. And another group of people will kind of go to things like, well, it's your knowledge about leadership. Do you know anything about leadership? Because oftentimes, as you know, in organizations, people are promoted because they were a great frontline worker and a hard worker. But then the activity of actually getting work done through others, it's a totally different role. So do you have any knowledge whatsoever of what a great leader does? Most people haven't done that research, similar to most parents who are in a position of authority haven't done the research on parenting literature. Great research has been done about what it means to be a great parent. Have you investigated it? Have you explored it beyond, what to expect when you're expecting?
Yes.
Right.
We had a favorite.
That.
We had a favorite about Love and Logic. I don't know if you had read that book, but that's a great one, Raising Kids with Love and Logic.
Yes.
And you can learn a lot. Like, why learn the hard way? Why learn the hard way about leadership either? I think one thing that struck me when you were saying that some people go to one direction on character and another go to experience and another go to this and that, it seems to me that, and I'll ask you, is there a right or a wrong answer to that? But I think the cool thing is that the conversation that it generates makes people think about it and talk about it.
Yes. And I mean, it's so holistic and everyone individually has something different that they need to work on. So for instance, I might need to work on emotional intelligence. You might need to work on optimism, or you might need to work on some actual skill. Because again, who you are is how you lead. Well, how skilled are you at presenting? How skilled are you at navigating conflict? How skilled are you at negotiation? How skilled are you at problem solving? I mean, that's another piece of this whole thing as well. So it's this whole universe of topics that shows up. The good, the bad, and the ugly. It shows up, whether I'm in a B2B, B2C, doesn't matter. It shows up to my team. And, if who you are is how you lead, and we can agree that that's probably then what shows up. What I also, Dave, you touched on this, but what I love about that quote is I think you could probably put a different word at the end of this, that quote. Who you are is how you parent. Who you are is how you partner. Who you are is how you team or coach or teach. If you're in a position of authority and others are in your care, well, that semi kind of
right. And maybe
behavior.
It doesn't even have to apply to leaders. Let's say that you've got a baseball team. Well, it's a team. Yep. Yeah, there's a manager of the team, but everybody has their role to play. On that team. Who you are is how you play first base,
Yes, exactly. And again, am I emotionally resilient? Do I display grit? Am I working hard? Am I working above and beyond? All that shows up. Yeah. So in a position of authority, that quote fascinates me because have
you ever heard of a book called The Book of Circles?
I haven't. No.
Visualizing Spheres of Knowledge is what it's called. And it shows over time how circles have been used to visualize information and data. And it is absolutely fascinating. Now, my mind, because I've been reading this, went to something as you were talking. I was thinking there's a circle that's bisected into, sort of like, let's say, 8 pie pieces or something.
Sure.
And each one of these pie pieces is a different color, and it represents maybe a different part of that equation that sort of you need to have a certain level of each of those to be a good leader. But that there is some way to assess where you are on those different things. And then you can have a readout that shows like a smaller pie piece for where you are a little bit weaker, and a stronger pie piece that like visually display where your leadership sort of strengths and maybe gaps are, or something like that.
Well, I love that visual. And it's interesting because even, once we get into, so another piece of this could be your developmental level, your maturity. I mean, it's just fascinating the layers we could get into, or pieces of that pie. But then each one of those slices of pie is a whole world. A human being's personality is, as a friend of mine, Mike Muscolo, said, each one of us are infinity. I mean, my personality is fundamentally, in so many ways, different than yours. My strengths, my weaknesses, my areas of growth, my learning style, my thinking style. I mean, it's infinite in the differences. And so we oftentimes have this kind of one size fits all approach to education or to development, when in my best estimate, I mean, it's highly individualized what each one of us need to be more successful. You had that supervisor somewhere along the way who was not emotionally intelligent, struggled to remain positive, and talked ill of other employees that they were leading. And the damage that that's doing to culture, to trust, to, but that's who they were. That's who they were. They just talked ill. And of course, you knew they were talking ill of you when you weren't in the room.
Exactly.
Their lack
to
of
sort
optimism.
of curry favor with whoever they were talking to, just sort of like, yeah.
Sure.
But
they might have been
we've all been there. We've all been there.
They might be a really, really hard worker, right. Long hours, incredibly smart, very competent. And so, there's a lot of strengths, but there's also some areas of growth here that are damaging. And so I think the master lesson for me is, if who you are is how you lead or parent or teach or coach or partner, and others are in your care, are you the best version of you? And I don't care if you're in a bank, healthcare institution, manufacturing, it doesn't matter. If others are in your care, are you the best version of you, so that what shows up, who you are, is the best version of you? Because we know what it feels like when you're in the presence of someone who is a great leader, a great coach. They challenge the heck out of you. They take your skills and knowledge and abilities to the next level, but they care. You know that they have your best interest at heart. You know that they're a good model to actually be developmentally helping you grow. But we also know what it feels like when we're in a position where we have a person in a position of authority where they don't walk their talk. They don't display integrity. You don't totally trust them. And that's just tragic, Dave. I mean, it's tragic when you have a whole organization. Again, I don't care if it's a school. I don't care if it's manufacturing. I don't care if it's a nonprofit. When you have an organization in the care of someone who's not done their own work, it's tragic. It's terrible. And so I think that the second master lesson for me in all of this is, what are you doing to stay in a continual place of growth and in a highly personalized way? So for instance, I see a therapist every 2 weeks, not because I have some major flaw going on in my life. In fact, this person's helping me thrive, but he helps me grow. He helps me process. He helps me work on the things I individually need to focus on and get better at, because just like anyone else, I have areas of growth, many, many of them. And so but then I also have a mentor, and I speak with my mentor every 2 weeks. I go on a walk and I speak with this individual, former CEO of a medical center in Orlando, knows a ton about leadership. He helps me think. I'm constantly listening to podcasts and audiobooks and trying to sharpen the saw, as Covey would say. And if you have someone who is not in a position where they're continually learning and growing. They're just living the same life over and over. They don't have feedback. They aren't in a situation where they're in a position of authority and they're just behaving a certain way year after year after year. And in some cases, maybe that's damaging or toxic to culture. It's too bad. I mean, it's was it Aristotle, an unexamined life is not worth living? It's too bad. And again, if people are in your care, kids, teams, employees, are you the best version of yourself? So those are not new concepts, but they are kind of timeless concepts. And for me, that's where my head, because again, each person is an infinity. So there's an infinite number of things that I specifically have to work on and get better at.
Sure. And just 100% unique. I mean,
Yes.
literally, every person has their own unique story from where they were born, how they were raised,
Yep.
Their family life, their education, their working life, the music that they like, everything, all the things that they consume, and it makes somebody certainly unique.
Yep.
If someone's listening and let's say they totally believe what you just said, which is believable, for sure, but they don't know where to start. They're like, hey, I want to be on this path of self-improvement. I want to be a leader. Maybe it's in B2B marketing and sales. Maybe it's something else. But where would they start if part of it is about assessment, and also constant learning and growth and that sort of thing? If somebody's not been doing that but wants to.
Yeah. So many outlets. I mean, especially today, as you know, Dave, I mean, so many outlets, whether it's get a subscription to the Harvard Business Review online for $10 a month or whatever it is right now, whether it's listen to podcasts by more popular authors on the topic like John Maxwell, and just immerse yourself for 30 minutes a day on the way to work or the way home from work and learn. Audible is an incredible resource where a great starting point is a book called The Leadership Challenge by Kouzes and Posner. These two were at Santa Clara in the Bay Area, and they have been studying this topic for 40 years. I think they just published, it was the 7th edition of their book, The Leadership Challenge. And you can listen to that book, and that has incredible insights and great starting places as a foundation. But it's seeking that out. In our community, Case Western Reserve has incredible executive education opportunities for people to improve their leadership skills. So there's certificates, there's MBAs, there's YouTube videos, there's TED Talks. Are you curious? Are you curious, and do you want to be better? And there's this thing called motivation to lead. And if you are motivated to lead, then you have to be motivated to learn about what makes a great leader, because there's some good indicators out there. I don't know that there's truth. There's too many variables. In some contexts, the leader, quote unquote, has the most guns and is the most brutal. In this world, in some contexts, that's the leader, quote unquote. It's not in other contexts. And so there's so many variables about what it means to be the leader or a good leader or an effective leader. Mm-hmm. I have a podcast, and for 3 years, Dave, I have been exploring this topic, and I am constantly amazed at how much I'm learning week after week after week about the nooks and crannies. So for me, it's about, do you have a system of learning in place? And again, for me, that's Audible, that's podcasts, that's a therapist, that's my mentor, that it's just staying curious about the many, many nooks and crannies of this topic, right? Because again, you can get into presentation skills, negotiation, conflict, leadership styles, followership styles, teams, culture, engagement. There's so many different topics.
Yeah, so you've got to, sort of just start. I think, the first step for the 1,000-mile journey, or however long the journey is. It's probably a continuous journey. So
it is.
I think there's really like a temptation in today's society, and it keeps getting more and more, I think, clear that people want immediate gratification. And, technology gives us that. whether it's ordering something from Amazon, and it used to be, oh, if I got it in a few days, and now I'm like questioning it if I don't get it on the same
That
day.
afternoon.
Yeah, or just, pretty soon it'll be here before I even think about it or order it, and I'm sure that's in the works as well.
Yeah.
But it goes with everything else. Like somebody's listening and saying, oh, well, I wanted to do that when I was listening to him, but then he just talked about all that stuff that I have to do.
Yeah.
I don't have time to do all that.
No,
But
I think
but you got to start, right? You just got to
start.
You don't need to boil the ocean, as they say.
No, don't anchor your thinking there. Anchor your thinking on, look, I'm going to listen to a book on leadership every year, or a book and a couple podcast episodes.
That sounds doable, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that's called anchoring bias, as you know. I anchor myself over here, and then it becomes so overwhelming that I can't think about other potential options. And so I think another guest of mine on the podcast, Chip Shoba, he's the former dean of the College of Medicine at Dartmouth and at Ohio State. He said, look, this work of personal growth is a mountain without a top. So it's not how quickly, but it's the tortoise, and you're slowly chipping away and building your knowledge and improving. I listened to a book by Lisa D'Amour. She worked at a local girls' school in independent school in our community, and she's an expert in raising teenage girls. I learned so much from that, and I've implemented pieces of that. Now, I'm not going to go become a PhD in parenting, but I'm chipping away and I'm learning, and I'm staying in a continuous state of learning. And that's what I think is more important. Do you have a system for learning?
Yeah.
That
people like feedback too. They like to know that they're actually accomplishing something, and that they are learning and growing. Do you have suggestions on how people can tell if they are becoming a better leader?
Well, I think you've touched on something that's just super important, that oftentimes in organizational life, we do not get unfiltered feedback, especially if you're in a position of authority. Because you're in a position of authority, there's fear. And I am going to, Dave, if you are my boss, I am going to be very, very, very careful. You have my future in your hands. You have my finances in your hands. I'm going to be very careful to not offend, to not tell you exactly what I think. Most of the time, you're going to have to chip away, and I'm going to have to get to a place where I truly trust you, that you value my feedback, that you want to hear my feedback. I know that you might not always agree with it, and that's totally cool. But you have to chip away at that in me. And getting that unfiltered, honest feedback is gold, because too many leaders and listeners, and you, Dave, and I have worked for people where you knew if you told them what you really thought, it would be trouble. If you told them what you really thought, it would stall your career. If you told them what you really thought, they'd hold it against you. And if you're that person, you are shutting yourself off and literally flying blind. You are sitting in a board meeting, no one says anything, you walk out and you think everyone's aligned, and then the meeting after the meeting happens, and no one's really truly aligned. No one's truly engaged. And you're sitting there, you're flying blind at that point. And you're set up to fail in certain instances as well. So you're creating a culture around you where people feel that they can give honest, unfiltered feedback, where they can share and contribute their ideas. Again, we're not going to act on all of those, and I'm not going to agree with all of it. That's totally cool. But are we creating a space where you have access to a broader set of knowledge of how people perceive you, experience you, how they feel like they can contribute to the conversation and put their ideas on the table? Oof. I sat in a meeting, gosh, Dave, like this is 6 years ago, and there's a person in a position of authority in the room. And I made a comment, and the person said, well, if we're going to be negative all day, I don't think this conversation is going to go very far. And woof, if that didn't just suck the air out of the room. And did anyone else contribute throughout the day? No. And did the meeting fail? Yes. And did that leader walk out of the room thinking everyone was aligned and excited? Yes. Were they? No. Did it fail? Yes. And that's toxic. That's tragic.
I was in a meeting like that once where sort of the top leader, one of the top leaders of a multi-billion-dollar public company was in an innovation meeting. And a lot of people were throwing out ideas for innovation. And she was at the end of the table, and she was one of these people that sort of like, there's energy givers and energy suckers that you just sort of said, like she will basically, and she sort of says in kind of an Eeyore voice, and she's the leader.
Yep.
So, I mean, she says, can we please just talk about how to sell more of what we already make?
Okay. So there you go. Right. I mean, so you just reminded me of another quote that I love that my friend Jonathan Reams says: leaders create the weather. What's the weather? What's the weather she's creating there? It's like a 50 and cloudy.
Yeah, it's not sunny.
It's not, and not that it's always sunny.
You can't see the horizon. No, it can't always be blue skies, but that's amazing. I love that.
You're unconsciously creating 50 and rainy every day. And
yes.
again, it requires some intentionality here. Some days are 70 and sunny. Some days are 85 and sunny.
Yeah.
Are you intentionally creating the weather? And sometimes it needs to be stormy. I get it. But it's whether or not it's just your default behavior and you aren't even aware that you're literally, this whole year was 50 and rainy in this organization.
Yeah. So do you think that when people think about leadership, do they like necessarily jump to like top leadership and therefore maybe hamstring themselves or hold themselves back thinking, oh, I'm not ready to be a leader. I can't be a leader yet because the leader is the alpha, the top or whatever it is. Yeah. But can't you be a leader like literally starting now? Is it a mindset?
It's 100% a mindset. Again, great acts of good have occurred in the world by people who didn't have formal authority. Gandhi did not have formal authority in the beginning. Mandela did not have formal authority. Martin Luther King Jr. did not have formal authority in the beginning, yet they had very high levels of influence in the end, right? And of course, Gandhi went on to be elected and Mandela went on to be elected. But Martin Luther King Jr., he was the president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, but he wasn't in a position of authority. So yes, I often will use a definition of it's the process of influencing others toward a common vision. That leadership is a process of influencing others toward a common vision. So influence can happen in brief moments. It can happen by people who don't have the title. Just think about it this way for a second, Dave. Think about that person in the last organization you were in who didn't have the title or the position of authority, but had a great deal of influence among the team. That person is influencing the mindset, the emotional state of others on the team, sometimes for good, sometimes for ill. So no, you do not have to have a position of authority to influence others toward a common vision. And again, whether it's Harvey Milk, who in the beginning may not have had a position of authority, or Larry Kramer in the LGBTQ plus community, these people didn't have positions of authority, but they're trying to influence Reagan or Fauci at the time to pay attention to AIDS. So I think it's an interesting conversation. It really is. But oftentimes I'm in organizations, Dave, and it's fascinating because if you believe Gallup's numbers, generally speaking, the frontline manager is 70% of how someone experiences the organization. My frontline manager, my direct supervisor is 70% of how I experience organization X. And I'm in organizations all the time, Dave. And the people I'm sitting in front of don't identify as the leaders. When they have a team of 5 or a team of 12, they are 100%, 70% of how someone's experiencing the organization. So are we training them to be successful when serving in this role? Because A, that role is super hard. It's not easy. And B, you know what? You are the organization. And if this person on the front line doesn't know how to create a positive culture, if who they are is someone who has no clue what it means to lead, well, that's what you get. And then we wonder in organizational life why engagement numbers are low, why turnover is high, just all of that, right? Because we have people in positions of authority. Think of any other industry. You wouldn't put someone in the cockpit if they didn't really know how to fly. That's
no, you wouldn't. And being the visual person that I am, I just had another sort of visual come to my mind. And it was this mountain that you talked about, this continuous mountain.
Yeah.
And if you think about the 12 people that you just mentioned who really are leaders, but they're not thinking of themselves as leaders, maybe they're on that mountain and they're pretty high up on that mountain. And there's the leader that they really, think is, oh, well, that's what we all aspire to. So that's the leader up on the mountain. And they're not aware that there's hundreds or thousands of people behind them coming up the mountain. Yes. And so we need to have, I feel like we need to have the wherewithal to turn around and look down and be aware of all the folks we can influence, so, and be a leader, like help share the common vision about what is that mountain that we're climbing? Why are we doing it? What are we trying to do? And who are we trying to help?
Exactly. And so I think, those two or three quotes just really, I'll say one more thing maybe as we begin to kind of wind down, but, I love the quote, every system's perfectly designed for the results that it achieves.
Right. For good or bad.
Yes. For good or bad. Right. So oftentimes it's easy for a leader to kind of look out at the 12 people in front of them and say, ugh, they don't get it, or they're not doing their part, or they're not engaged, or they aren't displaying grit, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the leader is a part of that system. And if the leader's creating the weather, each one of us in a position of authority, if I'm looking at a class of students and they're all tired and checked out and on their devices and sleeping, well, I own a piece of this dysfunction. What I'm putting out is causing people to go to sleep. And it's no different with leadership in some ways. I mean, if I'm not getting the results I want, what do I need to own in this? Maybe I've been avoiding some difficult conversations. Maybe I really haven't made myself clear and clearly outlined my expectations and set this up. Maybe we haven't given them any training. Not always, but what do I need to own in us not getting the results that I want? I sometimes will give an assignment to students and what comes back is crap. Well, oftentimes it goes through the filter first of how did I not set this up well? Because this isn't what I was hoping for, what I had in my mind. And
right. And you mentioned Stephen Covey earlier, who, talks about clean and green. In other words, he left his son to watch after the lawn.
Yep.
And said, hey, watch the lawn while I'm out of town. And he comes back and it's brown and there's stuff on it. And he's like, his son said, I cut the lawn. I cut the lawn. What did you mean? And he's like, oh, I meant that it needed to be clean and green.
Yeah.
So that's actually articulating your desired outcome.
Yep.
Which is a lot of what I talk about in the interviewing that I do in terms of getting customer input.
Yep.
We're actually going out and talking to customers in the B2B world or B2C anywhere. And well, we're not shutting down if people have clever ideas and that they want us to, implement, but it's the desired outcome behind the idea.
Yep.
That really we want to learn about.
Yep.
So it's the same way with you, with the system you're setting up, and there's people listening that, have systems in place. Some they don't have control over, some of they do. But the outcomes are going to be a direct result of the system that's set up.
Yes. And I'm a part of that. And what do I need to own in this dysfunction? My undergrad was in marriage and family therapy. And there was this theory called family systems theory, which suggested that, look, if Jimmy's having problems, it might not just be Jimmy. Jimmy's part of a family system here. Oh, okay, dad's an alcoholic. Oh, okay, dad flies off the handle and yells and screams all the time. Oh, interesting. Okay. So, we look at Jimmy as the problem when there's probably some other dynamics that contribute to kind of the dysfunction.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely. Nobody operates really in a vacuum or complete isolation.
No.
We're all influenced by others around us.
Yeah. And so that's a quote that constantly I come back to as well. Every system's perfectly designed for the results that it achieves. So here we are. If it's not what we want, what do I need to own in that? And what are we going to experiment with to get somewhere new, to move the needle, to shift where we are from where we are right now? Again, not anchoring on fix or solve potentially, but how do we move the needle and, again, try and make things better than we found them. And I think there's a lot of individuals in positions of authority out there. Again, B2C, B2B, doesn't matter. Industry doesn't matter. It could be a minister or a priest. It could be a psychologist who's running a group of psychologists.
It could be Elon Musk who bought Twitter and decided, well, the system that was in place isn't the right system. So I'm going to try a whole bunch of other systems with about, 10% of the people.
Well, that's going to be fascinating to watch that unfold. Can he brute force? Because that's what it's not a great case study in effective leadership, but that's going to
not yet.
Yeah.
Who knows?
It's going to be fascinating to watch it play out.
It really is.
Now he's kind of like put his hands back and set this new CEO up to, I don't know. That'll be very interesting. But he's a visionary, and he's an incredible visionary, and he's accomplished many, many, many things that no one else had. Whether that's shifting the automotive industry or shifting rocketry. It's incredible what that man.
It really is unbelievable that you think about one person doing some of these things, but doing one of those things, not multiple ones. Neuralink. The list goes on. So anyhow, that's for another time. Listen, Scott. Yeah, that's a rabbit hole for sure. But this has been really fantastic, and I hope that people listening have internalized this and wrote down a few of those quotes and a few of the books that we mentioned and things like that. And if you have any questions for Scott, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Great. So I'm on LinkedIn, Scott J. Allen. So that's a great way to get in touch with me. And then just, I will connect with you and then message me. And that's where we can start the conversation for sure.
That's perfect. Thanks. I learned a lot, and this is always a good reminder for me too. I'm growing, all the time too. Not perfect. We
all are.
And,
hopefully.
Yes, we are. So thank you, Scott, and everybody. Thank you for listening. This has been the B2B Marketing and Sales Podcast, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the one and only B2B Marketing and Sales Podcast, the source for B2B marketing and sales insight. If you enjoyed the podcast, please be sure to subscribe and leave these old guys a 5-star rating. Check the show notes for any links and contact information. You can always contact us by going to b2bmarketingsalespodcast.com. Thank you, and keep on marketing, keep on selling.